Why does a quiet passion provoke such loud opinions? Why does exploring the unknown make other people so uncomfortable? What makes them feel they have a right to judge your inner world? You share a small piece of yourself, something that brings you meaning, and instead of curiosity, you get a wall of tired, dismissive lines. It can feel lonely, it can make you want to hide that part of yourself away again. But why should you have to? Number 15, isn't that just escapism? Carl Jung, the founder of analytical psychology, spent years studying alchemy. He didn't believe in turning lead into gold. He saw it as a symbolic map of personal transformation, a process he called individuation. The Great Depression saw a massive surge in the popularity of pulp magazines featuring fantasy and science fiction, selling millions of copies a month. A 2017 study found that over a quarter of US adults now identify as spiritual but not religious, up 8 percentage points in just 5 years. So you mentioned you're studying tarot or reading about Gnosticism or practicing meditation focused on archetypes. And the person across from you, maybe a friend or a family member, gets that look on their face. It's a mix of pity and condescension, then they say it. Isn't that just a way to escape from the real world? The question hangs in the air. The implication is clear. You are weak. You are unable to cope with reality. You are a child running away from your problems by playing with fantasy. It's an accusation dressed as a concerned question. It's one of the most frustrating things to hear because it dismisses your entire inner life as a failure to deal with your outer life. Let's break down what the real world even means to the person saying this. Usually they mean a world of bills, jobs, traffic, and political news. A world of concrete, measurable, and often stressful things. To them, anything that isn't focused on these practical matters is, by definition, not real. It's a distraction, it's fluff, but this is a very limited view of reality. Is your inner state not part of the real world? Are your thoughts, your feelings, your search for meaning not real? Human beings are not just economic units. We are not just cogs in a machine. We have always sought meaning beyond mere survival. From the earliest cave paintings to the great cathedrals to the vast libraries of philosophy and poetry, we've been trying to understand our place in the cosmos. Esotericism is a part of this long tradition. It's not about escaping the world. It's about trying to understand it on a deeper level. When you study the Kabbalah, you're not trying to forget you have to pay your rent. You're exploring a symbolic system that attempts to map the relationship between the divine and the created world. When you use tarot cards, you're not hoping a magic piece of cardboard will solve your problems. You're using archetypal images to access your own intuition and see your problems from a new perspective. This is an active engagement with reality, not a passive retreat. It requires study. It requires discipline, it requires self-reflection. It's often harder work than just zoning out in front of the television, which is a far more common and socially acceptable form of escapism. No one ever says, you watched 8 hours of that reality show. Isn't that just escapism? But mention you spend an hour meditating on a single esoteric concept, and suddenly you're the one running from reality. The irony is that many people who make this accusation are themselves deeply engaged in their own forms of escapism. They might lose themselves in sports and celebrity gossip and consumerism and the endless scroll of social media. These are all ways of avoiding the difficult questions of life. What is my purpose? What does it all mean? Am I living a good life? Esotericism, in its many forms, confronts these questions head-on. It doesn't offer easy answers. It offers tools and frameworks for the search. So how do you respond? You don't have to get defensive. You could try being direct. You could say, I find it helps me engage with the world more deeply, not escape from it. Or you could turn the question back on them gently. What do you consider the real world? Is our inner life not part of it? Sometimes this can open up a real conversation. Other times the person is not interested in a real conversation. They have already made up their mind. In that case, the best response might be to simply change the subject. You don't owe anyone a defense of your inner life. You are not on trial. Your path is your own. It's not an escape. It's a journey inward, which can make the journey outward all the more meaningful. Number 14, are you in a cult? The word occult comes from the Latin occultus, which means hidden or secret. It originally referred to hidden knowledge, not anything sinister. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, one of the most influential esoteric groups of the late 19th century, counted Nobel Prize-winning poet W.B. Yeats and actress Florence Farr among its members. Theosophy, a spiritual movement founded in 1875, played a significant role in introducing Eastern religious and philosophical concepts to the Western world. This one is a classic. It's usually delivered with wide eyes and a hushed, conspiratorial tone. You mention you're part of a study group that discusses alchemical texts or a lodge that works with ceremonial magic, and the person's brain short circuits. They leap from group of people with unusual interests straight to brainwashed cult. Wait, they'll say, are you in a cult? It's an exhausting question because it's based on pure, unadulterated, media-driven fear. Most people's understanding of cult comes from sensationalized news stories and documentaries about a few very specific destructive groups. They picture charismatic leaders, financial exploitation, and people cut off from their families. They're not picturing a handful of history buffs in a library basement discussing John Dee. The word itself is a weapon. It's designed to shut down thought. Once you label something a cult, you don't have to understand it. You don't have to engage with its ideas. You can just dismiss it as dangerous and wrong. It's a convenient box for anything that seems strange or non-mainstream, let's be clear. Destructive, high-control groups do exist. They are a serious problem, but they are defined by their behaviors, not by their beliefs. Experts on the subject often use models like the BITE model: behavior, information, thought, and emotional control to identify them. A group is a cult because it controls your behavior, isolates you from outside information, dictates your thoughts, and manipulates your emotions. It has nothing to do with whether they study the Zohar or the Upanishads. You can find cult-like dynamics in a corporate sales team, a political movement, or even a family. Most esoteric groups are the complete opposite of this. They are often decentralized, highly individualistic, and focused on personal research. The whole point is to know thyself, not to subordinate yourself to a leader. Many esoteric traditions are solitary by nature. A person can be a practicing hermeticist for 50 years without ever joining a group. The path is one of personal discovery, not groupthink. When you do find groups, they're often more like book clubs or philosophical societies. They meet to share knowledge, perform rituals that are essentially symbolic psychodramas, and support each other's individual work. The emphasis is on learning, questioning, and verifying things for yourself. This is the antithesis of a cult mentality which demands blind faith and unquestioning obedience. The cult accusation also reveals a deep misunderstanding of history. Throughout time, people with an interest in esoteric subjects have formed groups to share and preserve their knowledge. The Pythagorean schools in ancient Greece, the Neoplatonists of Alexandria, the alchemical guilds of the Renaissance, the Rosicrucian circles of the 17th century. These were not cults. They were centers of learning and philosophical inquiry, often operating at the cutting edge of thought for their time. So what's the best way to handle this question? Getting angry just confirms their suspicion that you're a defensive, brainwashed follower. The best approach is usually calm and educational. You could define what a cult actually is. A cult is more about control and manipulation than beliefs. My group encourages independent thought and research. You could also use an analogy. It's more like a philosophy club than a church. We read old texts and discuss ideas. Sometimes a little humor can disarm the situation. Only if a book club that reads weird old books counts as a cult. If the person is genuinely curious and just misinformed, this can open the door to a productive conversation. If they're just trying to be provocative, they'll likely drop it. They don't have a good comeback for calm reason. The accusation is all they have. When you refuse to fit into their scary little box, they don't know what to do next. Number 13, can you read my mind? The practice of cold reading, where a performer uses high probability guesses and careful observation to create the illusion of psychic ability, was formally documented and analyzed as early as the 1940s. A 2018 Gallup poll showed that 41% of Americans believe in extrasensory perception (ESP). Harry Houdini, the famous escape artist, spent the latter part of his career actively debunking spiritualists and mediums who claim to have supernatural powers, often replicating their tricks through purely physical means. This is the one you get at parties. You've just met someone, the conversation is going well. Then you make the mistake of mentioning your interest in esotericism, like their eyes light up, but not with intellectual curiosity. It's the look of someone who has just found a new toy. "Oh, cool," they say, leaning in. "So, can you read my mind? Tell me what I'm thinking right now." Or its close cousin, "Can you tell my future?" It's a demand, not a question. A demand to perform. A demand to prove that your interest is not just an intellectual pursuit, but a superpower you can whip out for their entertainment. It instantly reduces a vast and complex field of study into a cheap party trick. It's like telling a physicist, "Oh, you study quantum mechanics. Go on then, teleport something for me." The frustration comes from several places. First, it completely misunderstands the nature of most esoteric practices. While some traditions do touch on developing psychic sensitivities, often called the siddhis in Eastern traditions, or the gifts of the spirit in others, these are almost universally seen as byproducts of the main work, not the goal itself. They are often viewed as potential distractions that can inflate the ego and pull you off the path of genuine spiritual development. The real work is about self-knowledge, connection with the divine, and understanding the nature of reality. It's not about being a human crystal ball. Second, it puts you in an impossible position. If you say, "No, of course I can't read your mind," they often look disappointed, as if you failed a test. They might even say, "Oh, so it's not real then? Your entire field of interest is invalidated because you can't perform a miracle on command." If you try to explain the nuances, their eyes glaze over. They weren't looking for a nuanced explanation. They were looking for a show. Third, it's just plain rude. It's intrusive. They are asking you to violate their own privacy, read my mind, while simultaneously demanding a service from you. It turns you from a person into a vending machine of mystical experiences. The public perception of esotericism has been heavily colored by stage magic and fictional portrayals. People see characters in movies who can levitate objects or see the future at will, and they assume that's what it's all about. They don't see the years of quiet study, the meditation, the journaling, the difficult internal work. They only see the flashy, fictionalized result. A good response needs to be firm but not aggressive. It needs to reframe the conversation. One option is to be direct and educational. That's a common misconception. Most of this work is about self-understanding, like philosophy or psychology, not about performing tricks. Another option is to use an analogy they can understand. If they ask you to predict their future with tarot, you could say, "It's less like a crystal ball and more like a weather forecast. It shows you the current conditions and possible outcomes, but you still have to decide whether to bring an umbrella. The cards help you understand your choices. They don't make them for you." You can also deflect with a question that puts the focus back on them. "Why would you want me to? Are you worried about something in your future?" This can sometimes shift the conversation from a demand for a performance to a genuine human interaction. Ultimately, you have to remember that this request isn't really about you. It's about them. It's about their desire for magic, for certainty, for a break from the mundane. They want a shortcut to the mystery. Your job is not to provide that shortcut. Your job is to protect your own practice and its integrity. You are a seeker, not a sideshow act. Number 12, that's not scientific, Isaac Newton, the father of modern physics, dedicated a huge portion of his life to alchemy, trying to find the philosopher's stone. He wrote over 1 million words on the subject. The line between chemistry and alchemy was blurry for centuries. Many foundational chemical procedures were developed by alchemists. The placebo effect is a well-documented scientific phenomenon where a person's belief in a treatment can cause real physiological changes even if the treatment is inert. This is the big one, the ultimate shutdown. It comes from the person who prides themselves on being rational, logical, and evidence-based. You'll be talking about astrology as a system of archetypes or the concept of subtle energy in healing traditions, and they'll hit you with it. A flat declarative statement, that's not scientific, It's delivered as if it's new information. As if you, a person who has spent time studying these subjects, had somehow never considered their relationship to the scientific method. The unspoken message is, what you are interested in is worthless because it cannot be measured in a laboratory, therefore you are either ignorant or stupid. This is frustrating because it's a category error. It's like criticizing a painting because it's not a good car engine. It's judging one system of knowledge by the rules of another, completely different system. Science is a powerful method for understanding the physical, material world. It works by isolating variables, creating falsifiable hypotheses, and demanding repeatable, objective evidence. It is incredibly good at what it does. Esotericism, on the other hand, is concerned with the inner world. It deals with subjective experience, meaning, symbolism, and consciousness. These things are, by their very nature, not easily measured or repeated in a controlled setting. How do you quantify the feeling of a powerful synchronicity? How do you measure the personal meaning someone derives from a meditative vision? You can't, and you don't need to. The value of the experience is in the experience itself. The person making this argument is often operating under a philosophy called scientism. This is not the same as science. Science is a method. Scientism is the belief that science is the only valid way of knowing anything about the world, and that anything outside of science is nonsense. This is a philosophical position, not a scientific one. It dismisses art, ethics, philosophy, and personal experience as less valid or even invalid forms of knowledge. There's also a great deal of historical ignorance in the statement. For much of human history, what we now call science, philosophy, and esotericism were all part of the same pursuit of knowledge. The great minds of the Renaissance, like Paracelsus or John Dee, were both mystics and pioneers of what would become modern science. They saw no contradiction. They were simply using every tool at their disposal to understand the universe, both inner and outer. The rigid separation we have today is a relatively recent development, so how to reply? One way is to agree with them, but then reframe it. You're right, it's not science. It's not supposed to be. It's more like philosophy or art. It's a different way of exploring reality. This avoids a pointless argument and shows that you understand the distinction. You are not claiming that astrology is a branch of physics. You are claiming it's a symbolic language. You can also point out the limits of science itself. Science is great for understanding the how of the physical world, but this is more about exploring the why of personal experience. You could even bring up concepts from science that challenge a purely materialistic worldview, like the observer effect in quantum physics, but you have to be careful here. It's easy to slip into making pseudoscientific claims. It's better to stick to the philosophical distinction. The goal is not to win the argument. You will never convince a die-hard materialist that there is value in non-material pursuits. The goal is to assert that there is more than one valid way of knowing. The world is a vast, mysterious place. To insist on looking at it through only one narrow lens is not rational. It's a self-imposed blindness. Science is a wonderful, powerful tool, but a toolbox with only one tool in it is not very useful for building a meaningful life. Number 11. But what does it do? The Medici family, the powerful patrons of the Florentine Renaissance, were instrumental in funding the translation of the Corpus Hermeticum, a collection of ancient esoteric texts, in 1463. They considered this knowledge vital to a complete education. The Rosicrucian manifestos, published in the early 17th century, caused a massive stir across Europe by proposing a universal reformation of mankind through a combination of science, mysticism, and ethics. Many modern therapeutic modalities, such as Gestalt therapy and Jungian analysis, draw heavily on principles of self-awareness and integration of the shadow self, concepts long explored in esoteric traditions. This question comes from the pragmatist, the person who lives in a world of outcomes, results, and return on investment. They listen patiently as you talk about the symbolic meaning of the paths on the Kabbalistic tree of life or the philosophical implications of a Gnostic text. Then they lean back, cross their arms, and ask, okay, I get it, but what does it do? What's the practical application? The subtext is that if something doesn't have a direct, tangible, and preferably profitable outcome, it is a waste of time. It's the mindset of a society obsessed with productivity and efficiency. Reading esoteric philosophy is seen as an indulgence because it doesn't help you get a promotion, fix your car, or build a better mousetrap? It's an annoying question because it assumes that the only value something can have is utilitarian value. It completely ignores intellectual, spiritual, emotional, and personal value. It's the same mindset that asks, what's the point of poetry? Or why study ancient history? The point is not always to do something. Sometimes the point is to be something. To be more aware, more thoughtful, more connected, more human. The irony is that esoteric practices do have very practical application. They are just not the kind of applications the pragmatist is looking for. The work, as it's often called, is internal. The application is on the self. For example, the practice of ceremonial magic is not about shooting fireballs from your fingertips. It's a form of psychological discipline. It involves intense visualization, concentration, and the manipulation of symbols to bring about changes in your own consciousness. The practical application is increased focus, a better understanding of your own mind, and the ability to direct your will more effectively. These are incredibly useful skills in the real world. Studying alchemy is not about making gold. It's a metaphor for personal refinement. You take the base metal of your unexamined personality, with all its flaws and contradictions, and through a long, slow process of heating, dissolving, and recombining, i.e., self-reflection, breaking down old habits, integrating new insights, you aim to create the gold of an integrated, whole self. The practical application is a more stable, resilient, and authentic personality. Tarot is not about getting stock tips. It's a tool for creative problem-solving and brainstorming. By laying out the cards, you are presenting your subconscious mind with a set of random archetypal images. Your brain, which is a natural pattern-making machine, will start to create connections and stories. This can help you break out of rigid thinking patterns and see your situation from new angles. That is a profoundly practical skill. A good way to answer this question is to translate the internal benefits into external language. What does it do? It helps me improve my concentration and self-discipline. Or, it's a system for understanding myself better, which helps me make better decisions in my life. Or, it's a creative tool like journaling or brainstorming that helps me think more flexibly. You can also challenge the premise of the question itself. What's the practical application of listening to music or looking at a beautiful painting? It enriches your experience of being alive. This is the same. This shifts the frame from pure utility to the value of human experience. The person asking this question is not necessarily hostile. They are just looking at the world through a very specific lens. They have been taught that time is money and that every activity must have a measurable output. Your job is not to convert them, but to explain that some of the most valuable things in life don't fit on a spreadsheet. The result of the work is a changed person. And a changed person changes the world around them. That is a very practical application indeed. Number 10. Isn't that devil worship? The figure of Baphomet, often associated with Satanism, was first drawn by occultist Eliphas Levi in the 1850s. It was intended as a complex symbol representing the balancing of opposites, male-female, good-evil, above-below, and the totality of the universe, not an object of worship. The inverted pentagram was not widely associated with evil until the 19th century. Prior to that, the upright pentagram was a Christian symbol for the 5 wounds of Christ, and the inverted version was used by some ceremonial magicians to symbolize spirit descending into matter. The Church of Satan, founded in 1966, is an atheistic organization that uses Satan as a symbol of individualism and rebellion against tyranny. They do not believe in or worship a literal devil. This is perhaps the oldest and most tired accusation in the book. It stems from centuries of religious propaganda and Hollywood horror movies. You mentioned you're reading about Aleister Crowley, or that you have a pentagram amulet and the person recoils in fear. Whoa, they say, their voice dropping. Isn't that, devil worship? It's a conversation stopper. It's not a real question, it's a verdict. It lumps 1,000 different traditions, philosophies, and practices into a single, terrifying category. It's born of ignorance and a fear of anything that falls outside the narrow confines of mainstream Abrahamic religion. The first problem is that most esoteric traditions don't even have a figure corresponding to the Christian concept of Satan. The Western esoteric tradition is deeply syncretic. It draws from Neoplatonism, Gnosticism, Hermeticism, Kabbalah, and ancient Egyptian and Greek mythology. In these systems, the ultimate reality is often described as a singular, unknowable divine source. The one, the monad, Ein Sof. The universe emanates from this source in a series of stages. There isn't a cosmic war between a perfectly good God and a perfectly evil devil. The concepts are far more nuanced, dealing with dualities like light and dark, spirit and matter, but not in the simplistic good versus evil framework of popular religion. Many Gnostic traditions, for example, viewed the creator God of the Old Testament, the demiurge, as a flawed, ignorant being, not an evil one. They saw the serpent in the Garden of Eden as a heroic figure, bringing knowledge gnosis to humanity, not a tempter. This is a radical rereading of the Genesis story, but it is not devil worship. It's a different theological and philosophical system entirely. The symbolism is another major point of confusion. People see a pentagram and immediately think of evil. They don't know its long history as a symbol of protection. It's used by the Pythagoreans to represent health, or its Christian meaning. They see a picture of Baphomet and see a demon, not a complex allegorical diagram about the nature of reality. They have been conditioned by a culture that has stripped these symbols of their original context and assigned them a single negative meaning. The second problem is the very concept of worship. Most esoteric practices are not about worship in the traditional sense of prayer, supplication, and adoration of a deity. The work is often closer to a kind of spiritual science or psychological art. The ceremonial magician, for instance, isn't praying to an angel or a spirit. They are using established symbolic systems to contact specific levels of their own consciousness or archetypal forces in the universe. It's an active process of invocation and evocation, not passive worship. The goal is to learn from and even command these forces, not to bow down before them. So, how do you respond to such a loaded accusation? It's tempting to get angry, but that's rarely productive. The best approach is calm, factual clarification. You can address the terminology directly. Actually, most of these traditions don't even have a devil figure like in Christianity. The worldview is very different. You can explain the symbolism. That symbol, the pentagram, has been used for thousands of years by many different cultures. For a long time in Europe, it was actually a Christian symbol. You can clarify the nature of the practice. It's less about worship and more about self-exploration. Think of it like a form of active meditation or psychological work using symbols. It's important to gauge your audience. If the person is genuinely fearful and just repeating what they've been told, a little education can go a long way. If they are a religious fundamentalist looking for a fight, there's probably nothing you can say that will change their mind. In that case, the wisest course of action is to simply state, no, it's not, and refuse to engage further. You are not obligated to defend yourself against centuries of slander and misinformation. Your peace of mind is more important than winning a pointless argument. Number 9, you're too smart for that. Dr. John Dee, one of the most learned men of his age, was a trusted advisor to Queen Elizabeth I, a brilliant mathematician, astronomer, and navigator. He also spent the last third of his life attempting to communicate with angels. W.B. Yeats, who won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1923, was deeply involved in the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and his poetry is filled with esoteric symbolism. Carl Jung, a titan of 20th century psychology, based much of his later work on his study of Gnosticism, alchemy, and other esoteric traditions. This one is tricky. On the surface, it sounds like a compliment. It's often delivered with a tone of baffled admiration. You're such a logical, intelligent person. I just don't get why you're into all that stuff. You're too smart for that. But it's not a compliment. It's a backhanded insult. It's one of the most condescending things someone can say. The underlying assumptions are huge. First, it assumes that an interest in esotericism and being intelligent are mutually exclusive. Second, it assumes that the person saying it is in a position to judge your intelligence. Third, it implies that you have a blind spot, a weakness, a flaw in your otherwise excellent reasoning that allows this silly interest to exist. This comment reveals a very narrow and frankly unintelligent view of what intelligence is. The speaker likely equates intelligence with a specific kind of linear, analytical, materialistic rationality. They believe that being smart means rejecting anything that cannot be proven by the scientific method or expressed in a logical formula. They have no category for other forms of intelligence, intuitive intelligence, symbolic intelligence, emotional intelligence, or the ability to hold paradox and ambiguity. They are ignorant of the long and distinguished history of brilliant minds who have been deeply engaged with esoteric subjects. They don't know about Newton the alchemist or Kepler, the mystical astronomer who casts horoscopes. They don't know about the Cambridge Platonists or the many artists, poets, and thinkers whose work was fueled by their esoteric studies. They have a cartoonish image of people who are into that stuff as being gullible, uneducated, and desperate. When you don't fit that stereotype, it creates a cognitive dissonance for them. They can't reconcile smart person I respect with person interested in nonsense. So they invent the blind spot theory to make it make sense in their limited worldview. The comment is also deeply dismissive of the subject matter itself. It assumes that there is nothing of intellectual substance in esoteric traditions. Nothing to analyze, nothing to study, nothing to think deeply about. Anyone who has actually tried to read a classic text of Neoplatonism, Kabbalah, or alchemy knows how laughably untrue this is. These are dense, complex, intellectually demanding systems of thought. They require just as much, if not more, mental rigor to understand as any other field of philosophy or metaphysics. To dismiss it all as not for smart people is simply to advertise one's own ignorance. Responding to this requires a bit of finesse. You don't want to sound arrogant, but you also don't want to let the insult slide. One effective technique is to agree and then pivot. I appreciate you saying that. Actually, I find it intellectually stimulating. It's a lot like studying philosophy or comparative mythology. The systems are incredibly complex and have a fascinating history. This validates their compliment while correcting their false premise. Another way is to gently challenge their assumption by naming names. It's interesting. A lot of people feel that way. But then you look at historical figures like Isaac Newton or Carl Jung, who were brilliant thinkers and were also deeply involved in these subjects. It makes you wonder if there's more to it than we assume. This introduces evidence that contradicts their worldview without being confrontational. You could also just be direct and a little humorous. Are you saying I have to choose between being smart and being interested in cool, weird stuff? I'm gonna have to pick both. The key is not to get defensive about your own intelligence. The comment isn't really about you. It's about their inability to categorize you. You are a data point that doesn't fit their model of the world. By responding with calm confidence and a bit of information, you show them that their model might be the thing that's flawed, not your intellect. Number 8, that's just cultural appropriation. The tarot deck, as we know it today, emerged in 15th century Italy. It was originally a card game called tarocchi, and only later acquired its divinatory meanings. Western esotericism is, by its very nature, a syncretic tradition, meaning it has always blended ideas from multiple cultures, including ancient Egyptian religion, Greek Neoplatonic philosophy, Jewish Kabbalah, and Christian mysticism. The concept of chakras was introduced to the West largely through the writings of theosophists in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, who adapted and sometimes significantly altered the original Hindu and Tantric concepts. This is a newer, more modern criticism, but it's becoming increasingly common. It comes from a place of social awareness, which is good, but it is often applied with a lack of nuance and historical understanding. You mentioned you're studying the chakras, or using a Tibetan singing bowl, or working with a concept from Kabbalah. And someone, usually with the best of intentions, will say, "You have to be careful, that's cultural appropriation." It's a tricky and uncomfortable conversation. The person is trying to be an ally to marginalized cultures, and the issue of cultural appropriation is real and important. It happens when a dominant culture takes elements from a minority culture, strips them of their original meaning, commercializes them, and uses them without respect or understanding, often while the origin culture continues to be oppressed. Think of a fashion brand using a sacred Native American headdress as a fun accessory. That is a clear and harmful example. However, when applied as a blanket criticism to all of Western esotericism, it misses the mark. It fails to understand the complex history of how these ideas have been transmitted and transformed over centuries. Western esotericism is not a single monolithic culture borrowing from others. It is a long-running conversation and synthesis of ideas from many different sources. Let's take Kabbalah. Christian Kabbalah emerged during the Renaissance when Christian thinkers like Pico della Mirandola became fascinated with Jewish mysticism. They studied it deeply and tried to synthesize it with Christian theology. Was this appropriation? Or was it a genuine, if sometimes misguided, attempt at intellectual and spiritual exchange? The lines are blurry. It's not the same as someone with no knowledge of Judaism putting a Star of David on a t-shirt because it looks cool. Or consider the influence of Egyptian ideas. From the time of the ancient Greeks, Western thinkers have been fascinated by Egypt. The Hermetic texts, which form a cornerstone of the esoteric tradition, were believed to be the wisdom of the Egyptian sage Hermes Trismegistus. This was a deep, centuries-long engagement with a culture that was admired for its perceived spiritual depth. The problem with the blanket appropriation charge is that it can lead to a kind of cultural purity that has never existed. Cultures have always borrowed from, influenced, and synthesized with each other. It is how ideas move and grow. The key is not to stop this exchange, but to engage in it with respect, honor, and a commitment to understanding the original context. This is where the criticism has a valid point. There is a huge difference between a serious student who spends years studying Sanskrit to understand the Upanishads in their original context, and someone who gets a tattoo of an Om symbol because it looks spiritual. The first is deep engagement. The second is shallow aestheticism. Much of what passes for New Age spirituality falls into the second category. It often involves a superficial, commercialized, pick-and-mix approach that disrespects the traditions it borrows from. So, when confronted with this accusation, the first step is to listen and not be defensive. Acknowledge that the concern is valid. You're right, cultural appropriation is a serious issue, and it's something I think about a lot. Then, you can explain your own approach. That's why I try to study the history and context of these ideas. I want to understand where they came from and treat them with respect, not just use them as a trend. You can also highlight the syncretic nature of the tradition itself. What's interesting about this path is that it has always been about a conversation between different cultures. It's about finding the universal truths that connect them. It's about showing that you are not a spiritual tourist. You are a student. You are aware of the power dynamics and the potential for harm. You are striving to be a respectful participant in a long historical conversation, not a thief. This turns a potential confrontation into a demonstration of your own thoughtfulness and commitment to your path. It shows that you are not just taking, you are also learning, honoring, and trying your best to understand. Number 7, it's all just the placebo effect. The studies at Harvard Medical School have shown that the placebo effect can work even when the patient knows they are taking a placebo. This is sometimes called the meta-placebo effect. The color of a placebo pill can influence its effectiveness. For example, blue pills are generally better as sedatives, while red pills work better as stimulants. In some clinical trials for antidepressants, placebo pills have been shown to be up to 75% as effective as the actual drug. This is the slightly more sophisticated cousin of "that's not scientific." It comes from someone who has a passing familiarity with psychology or medical studies. They hear you talk about how a certain crystal makes you feel calm, or how a ritual you performed seemed to lead to a positive outcome. They nod sagely and say, "You know, that's really just the placebo effect." The intention is, once again, to dismiss your experience. They are translating your subjective reality into their objective framework. They are saying, the crystal isn't doing anything. The ritual didn't cause anything. It was all just in your head. Your belief made you feel better, but it wasn't real. The funny thing is, they are probably right, or at least partly right. The placebo effect is incredibly powerful. The human mind has a profound ability to influence the body and perception. Belief is a potent force. But the esotericist and the debunker draw two completely different conclusions from this fact. The debunker says, "See, it's not real, it's just placebo." They see it as a way to invalidate the experience. The esotericist says, "See? The mind is incredibly powerful. Belief can create real change. This is exactly what we've been working with all along." They see it as a validation of their entire practice. From an esoteric perspective, the placebo effect isn't a bug, it's a feature. It's one of the primary mechanisms of magic. What is a magical ritual, if not a highly structured and symbolic way of focusing belief and intention to create change? It's a placebo with theater. The incense, the candles, the chanting, the symbols. These are all tools to bypass the conscious, skeptical mind and speak directly to the subconscious, the part of you that actually runs the show. They are props to help you believe so strongly in a desired outcome that your mind begins to make it a reality. When you hold a piece of rose quartz and tell yourself it will help you be more loving and compassionate, you are programming your own mind. The crystal acts as a physical anchor, a reminder, a focal point for your intention. Every time you see it or touch it, your brain gets a little nudge. Be more loving. Is the rock itself emitting love vibrations? Maybe, maybe not. It almost doesn't matter. The rock is a tool for directing your own consciousness. The effect is real, regardless of the mechanism. This is why it's just a placebo argument is so frustrating. The person saying it thinks they are delivering a knockout blow, when in fact they are describing the very engine of the practice. They are so focused on the external object, the crystal, the herb, the sigil, that they miss the real point, the operator. The magic is not in the object, it's in the mind of the person using it. A good response to this comment is not to argue, but to agree enthusiastically. Exactly. Isn't it amazing what the mind can do? That's what this is all about, learning how to harness that power of belief and focus it deliberately. This completely takes the wind out of their sails. They were expecting a debate about whether crystals have energy. Instead, you've pulled the rug out from under them by agreeing and reframing the placebo effect as a skill to be cultivated. You can also use an analogy. It's like a key for a car. The key itself doesn't have the power to move you down the street, but it unlocks the engine, which does. These tools, the rituals, the symbols are like keys to unlock the power of our own minds. By embracing the concept of the placebo effect, you move the conversation away from a fruitless argument about external forces and toward a much more interesting discussion about the nature of consciousness, belief, and human potential. You show them that you're not a passive believer in magic rocks. You are an active participant in the workings of your own mind. And there is nothing more real than that. Number 6, why don't you just go to therapy? Phineas Quimby, a 19th century clockmaker and mental healer, is considered the intellectual father of the New Thought movement. He believed that illness was caused by erroneous beliefs and that a change in thought could lead to a cure. This directly influenced many early mind cure movements. The inner child concept, popular in many recovery and therapy models, bears a striking resemblance to older esoteric ideas of the divine child or the pure, original soul. Abraham Maslow, the psychologist famous for his hierarchy of needs, became increasingly interested in transpersonal psychology and peak experiences toward the end of his life, areas that overlap significantly with mystical and esoteric thought. This question is often asked with genuine, if misplaced, concern. The person sees you struggling with something, anxiety, a lack of direction, a difficult life transition. You mentioned that you are using your esoteric practice to work through it. They get a worried look on their face. I'm glad that helps, they say, but have you thought about just going to therapy? Talking to a real professional? The implication is that what you are doing is a lesser, amateur version of what real professionals do. It's seen as a coping mechanism, but not a solution. It suggests that you are avoiding proper treatment for a potential mental health issue by playing with spiritual ideas. This is frustrating for several reasons. First, it presents a false choice. It's not an either-or situation. Many people who are into esotericism are also in therapy, have been to therapy, or are strong advocates for therapy. The two are not mutually exclusive. In fact, they can be incredibly complementary. Therapy can provide you with tools to deal with your psychological history, your traumas, and your behavioral patterns. Esotericism can provide a framework of meaning, a connection to something larger than yourself, and a set of practices for exploring your own consciousness. One deals with healing the personality, the other deals with discovering the soul. You need a healthy personality to do any effective soul work. A good therapist can help you build a sturdy boat. Your spiritual practice is what you use to navigate the ocean. You need both. Second, the question ignores the fact that modern psychology and esotericism grew from the same roots and have been in conversation for over a century. Carl Jung is the most obvious example. His entire system of analytical psychology is built on concepts drawn directly from esoteric traditions, alchemy, Gnosticism, astrology, and mythology. He saw these ancient systems as profound maps of the human psyche. Like when you work with Jungian archetypes, you are doing a form of esoteric work. The line is not as clear as people think. Even outside of Jung, many therapeutic ideas have parallels in esotericism. The concept of mindfulness, now a staple of cognitive behavioral therapy, is a direct import from Buddhist meditation practices. The focus on self-awareness, personal responsibility, and living an authentic life is central to both modern therapy and countless esoteric paths. Third, the question can feel invalidating. It suggests that your spiritual life is merely a symptom of an unresolved psychological issue. While it is true that some people can get lost in spiritual bypassing using spiritual ideas to avoid dealing with their emotional problems, it is not true for everyone. For many, the spiritual path is a genuine calling, a search for truth and meaning that goes beyond just fixing what's wrong with them. To reduce that entire quest to a need for therapy is to diminish its significance. So how do you respond? Again, a non-defensive posture is key. That's a great point, and I'm a big believer in therapy. Actually, I find that this work and the work I do in therapy support each other really well. This answer validates their suggestion while showing that you are already on top of it. It dissolves the false choice. You could also offer a brief explanation of the different roles they play. For me, therapy is great for dealing with my personal history and my emotional patterns. This is more about exploring the bigger questions, like meaning and purpose. They address different levels of my experience. If you feel the person is genuinely concerned, you can thank them. I appreciate you looking out for me. It means a lot. For me, this practice is a source of strength and clarity, not a way to avoid my problems. It's important to remember that most people who ask this question are coming from a good place. They have been taught that if you have an internal problem, the correct and responsible thing to do is to see a therapist. They see your esoteric practice as an unknown and therefore potentially risky alternative. By showing them that you see the value in both, and that you are using them in a balanced and thoughtful way, you can reassure them and maybe even teach them something about the different ways a person can work on themselves. Number 5, you're just trying to be special. The Rosicrucian manifestos of the early 1600s claimed the existence of a secret brotherhood of enlightened sages who were working to transform society. This created a widespread Rosicrucian fever, with people across Europe trying to join what was likely a purely symbolic or fictional order. The concept of the Übermensch, or Overman, from philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, which described a self-overcoming individual who creates their own values, was later co-opted and distorted by various esoteric and political groups. E.G.I. Gurdjieff, an influential 20th century mystic, taught that most humans are asleep, operating as automatons, and that his fourth way system was a method for waking up to a higher level of consciousness. This is an accusation of ego. It's a direct attack on your motivations. The person saying this believes that your interest in esotericism is not a sincere search for truth or self-understanding. It's a performance. It's a way for you to feel superior to other people. You just like all this weird stuff because it makes you feel special and different. It's a cynical and deflating thing to hear. It takes something that feels deeply personal and meaningful to you and recasts it as a cheap ploy for attention. It discounts your curiosity, your study, and your experiences as nothing more than a costume you wear to look interesting. Let's be honest for a moment. Is there a grain of truth to it? For some people, yes. The esoteric world, like any subculture, can attract people who are looking for an identity. The allure of secret knowledge can be a powerful ego boost. The feeling of being an initiate or part of a select few who get it can be very seductive, especially for people who feel powerless or overlooked in their ordinary lives. This is the shadow side of the esoteric path, the trap of spiritual pride. It's something that every serious student has to confront within themselves. However, to assume that this is the only motivation, or even the primary one, for everyone is incredibly uncharitable and simplistic. It ignores the genuine driving curiosity that pulls people toward these subjects. It ignores the profound sense of meaning and connection that people find in these practices. It ignores the fact that For many, this path is not about feeling special, but about feeling connected to a tradition, to history, to the cosmos, and to the deepest parts of themselves. Often, the journey into esotericism begins not with a desire to be special, but with a feeling of being an outsider. It starts with the sense that the mainstream answers to the big questions of life are unsatisfying. The person feels that there must be more to reality than what they've been told. Their search is not for superiority, but for a home. They are looking for a language that can describe their inner experiences, a framework that makes sense of their intuitions. When they find it in an esoteric tradition, the feeling is not, I am special, but I am not alone. The accusation also says more about the accuser than the accused. It often comes from a place of insecurity. The person may feel that their own life is mundane, and they are resentful of anyone who seems to be living a more interesting or meaningful existence. By cutting you down and attributing your interests to a base motive like ego, they can feel better about their own lack of exploration. It's a leveling mechanism. You're not really seeking truth. You're just an egotist like everyone else. Therefore, I don't have to take your path seriously, and I don't have to question my own. How to respond? This is a tough one because it's a direct attack on your character. Getting defensive will only prove their point. I am not. I'm sincere. Sounds exactly like what an insincere person would say. A better approach is to turn the mirror back, but gently. That's an interesting perspective. What makes you think that's the main motivation? This forces them to articulate their assumption, which can sometimes make them realize how flimsy it is. Another option is to own the grain of truth, which can be very disarming. I think everyone likes to feel a little bit special sometimes, but for me, this is less about feeling special and more about feeling connected. The mainstream world can feel pretty alienating. This shows self-awareness and shifts the focus to a more relatable human need. You could also simply state your true motivation in a calm, simple way. I'm just a curious person. These ideas feel true and meaningful to me, so I'm exploring them. It's really as simple as that. You don't have to prove your sincerity to anyone. People who are determined to be cynical will always find a way. The best response is to continue your work with humility and integrity. The path of self-knowledge is, by its nature, a path of diminishing the ego, not inflating it. If you are genuinely on that path, your actions and your presence will be a better answer than any words you could say. Number 4, isn't it dangerous? During the European witch hunts from the 15th to the 18th centuries, estimates of executions range from 40,000 to 50,000 people. The vast majority of those accused were not practicing any form of magic. They were victims of social hysteria, religious persecution, and local disputes. The infamous Satanic Panic of the 1980s and 90s in the United States led to numerous false accusations and wrongful convictions, fueled by sensationalized media and dubious recovered memory therapy. There was never any credible evidence of widespread organized satanic ritual abuse. A 2011 study on meditation found that over 25% of regular practitioners reported experiencing unpleasant psychological effects, such as anxiety or depression, highlighting that even seemingly benign spiritual practices can have powerful and sometimes difficult results if not properly managed. This question is the flip side of the devil worship coin. It may not come with a specific religious agenda, but it's fueled by the same fear of the unknown. The person has read a scary story, seen a horror movie, or just has a general sense that meddling with forces man was not meant to know is a bad idea. Be careful, they'll say, with a worried frown. Isn't that stuff dangerous? You could open a door to something you can't close. The fear is twofold. First, there's the fear of external forces, demons, angry spirits, bad energy, psychic attack. This is the stuff of folklore and fiction. Second, and more realistically, there's the fear of internal forces, going crazy, losing your grip on reality, dredging up psychological trauma you can't handle. Let's address the second fear first, because it is legitimate. Esoteric practices are, at their core, techniques for altering consciousness. Meditation, ritual, visualization, divination. These are all designed to shift your awareness out of its normal, everyday state. This can be incredibly powerful and transformative. It can also be destabilizing if done carelessly or without proper preparation. It's like mountain climbing. Is it dangerous? Yes, of course. You can fall, you can get lost, you can get altitude sickness, but people do it anyway. They do it because the view from the top is worth the risk. And they mitigate the risk, they train, they study the route, they check the weather, they use the right equipment, they go with experienced guides. It's the same with esoteric work. A serious practitioner doesn't just jump into the deep end. They start with the basics: grounding, centering, basic meditation, self-reflection. They study the theory, they learn how to protect their own psychological space. The casting of the circle in ritual magic is a potent symbol and technique for this. They understand the importance of a stable life and good mental health as a foundation for the work. To dismiss the entire endeavor as dangerous is like telling someone not to learn to drive because car crashes happen. The answer isn't to avoid it, it's to learn to do it safely and responsibly. Now for the first fear, the external spooky stuff. This is where most of the popular anxiety lies. The idea of opening a door to a demonic dimension is a powerful and terrifying image. From an esoteric perspective, this is often seen as a misunderstanding. Most traditions view demons and spirits not as literal, independent creatures floating around in the ether, but as personifications of psychological forces within ourselves or archetypal patterns in the collective unconscious. When you do a ritual to evoke a spirit, you are not calling something from outside of you. You are calling up a part of yourself. You are bringing a hidden, repressed, or undeveloped aspect of your own psyche into your conscious awareness so you can understand it and integrate it. The demon you might encounter is your own unacknowledged anger, your own fear, your own shadow. And yes, confronting your own shadow can be dangerous. It can be terrifying, but it is also the only way to become a whole person. The danger is not from a monster under the bed. The danger is from your own unexamined mind. So, when someone asks if it's dangerous, a good response is to acknowledge the risk while emphasizing the importance of discipline and preparation. Like any powerful tool, it has to be treated with respect. There are risks, mostly psychological, but that's why there's also a lot of training involved in doing it safely. You can use the mountain climbing analogy or another one like deep sea diving or learning to handle electricity. It's a bit like working with electricity. It's incredibly useful, but you have to know what you're doing, or you can get hurt. So you learn the safety procedures first. You can also reframe the demons issue in psychological terms. A lot of the dangers people talk about are really about confronting difficult parts of yourself. It's challenging psychological work, but it's also very rewarding. This shows that you are not a naive thrill seeker. You are a responsible explorer. You understand the landscape, you respect the power you are working with, both in the universe and, more importantly, within yourself. The greatest danger in life is not in exploring the unknown. It's in living an unexamined life, blissfully unaware of the powerful forces at play just beneath the surface of your own mind. Number 3, it's just a scam to get your money. In the 1870s, the spiritualist movement was rocked by a series of high-profile exposures where debunkers revealed the physical tricks used by mediums to simulate spirit phenomena like floating trumpets and ectoplasm. The self-help industry, which often overlaps with New Age and esoteric ideas, is a multi-billion-dollar market, with estimates projecting it to be worth over $13 billion by 2022. Helena Blavatsky, the co-founder of the Theosophical Society, was accused of fabricating paranormal phenomena in the Hodgson Report of 1885, a report later criticized and effectively retracted by the Society for Psychical Research a century later, highlighting the controversy and complexity of such claims. This one comes from the hardened cynic. They see the world as a marketplace of predators and prey. When they hear about someone selling a tarot reading, a Reiki session, or an online course in Hermeticism, their immediate reaction is, it's a grift. They're just preying on vulnerable people and taking their money. And just like the you're trying to be special accusation, there is a painful amount of truth to this. The spiritual and esoteric world is absolutely full of scams, charlatans, and con artists. There are people who will charge you hundreds of dollars to remove a curse that they just invented. There are gurus who demand their followers life savings. There are workshops that promise to make you enlightened in a weekend for the low price of $5,000. It is a largely unregulated field, and where there is deep human longing, there will always be people ready to exploit it for profit. So the cynic is not wrong to be suspicious. Their mistake is in assuming that the scams are the whole story. They throw the baby out with the bathwater, they see the grifters and conclude that the entire field is fraudulent and that anyone involved in it, including you, is either a scammer or a sucker. This is like looking at the existence of predatory televangelists and concluding that all of Christianity is a financial scam, or seeing a corrupt politician and deciding that all forms of government are inherently evil. It's a lazy generalization that ignores the vast majority of sincere practitioners, scholars, and teachers who are not in it for the money. Most people who are deeply into esotericism spend far more money than they make. They buy books, they might take a course with a reputable teacher, they invest their time, which is their most valuable resource, in study and practice. For the vast majority, it is a passion, not a profession. And what about the people who do charge for their services? Is a tarot reader who charges for their time a scammer? Is a Reiki practitioner who charges for a session a fraud? Not necessarily. People have to make a living. If someone has spent years developing a skill, whether it's playing the piano, fixing a computer, or interpreting symbolic patterns, it is not unreasonable for them to charge for their time and expertise. The plumber who fixes your sink isn't a scammer. The therapist who helps you with your anxiety isn't a scammer. A spiritual practitioner who provides a valuable service is not automatically a scammer either. The difference between a legitimate service and a scam lies in honesty, transparency, and intent. A legitimate tarot reader will tell you that they are providing insight and perspective, not predicting a fixed future. A scammer will tell you that you are cursed, and only they can remove it for a hefty fee. A good teacher will empower you to find your own answers. A grifter will tell you that they are the only source of truth and demand your dependence. When you're faced with this accusation, the best defense is to agree with the premise and then make a distinction. You're absolutely right. There are a ton of scams and con artists in this area, and it's a huge problem. You have to be really discerning. This immediately shows that you are on their side. You are not a gullible victim. You are a savvy consumer. Then, you can explain how you or the people you respect are different. That's why I focus on the educational side of it. I'm interested in the history and philosophy, not the people who promise magic solutions. The real work is something you have to do for yourself for free. Or, if you are defending someone who charges for a service, I think of it like hiring any skilled professional. You're paying for their time and expertise. A good practitioner gives you a tool or a perspective you can use. They don't promise to solve all your problems for you. By aligning yourself with the cynic's skepticism, you can then guide them toward a more nuanced view. To show them that you know how to spot a scam, show them that you value integrity. You're not defending the snake oil salesman. You're defending the sincere seekers and the honest practitioners who are trying to navigate a field that is unfortunately full of landmines. Number 2, so what's your sign? The Babylonians developed the first known system of astrology around 2000 BC. They created the 12 signs of the zodiac and used them to predict weather patterns and communal events, not individual personalities. The sun sign astrology found in newspaper columns is a vast oversimplification that became popular in the 1930s. A full astrological birth chart is a complex map of the entire solar system at the moment of birth, involving the sun, moon, all the planets, their positions in the 12 signs and 12 houses, and the geometric angles aspects between them. The number of possible combinations is virtually infinite. This is the one that makes anyone with a serious interest in astrology want to tear their hair out. You mention that you study astrology, the other person's face lights up with recognition. "Oh, I love astrology," they say. "I'm a Leo. What's your sign?" It's meant to be a point of connection, but it feels like a total disconnect. It's the equivalent of telling someone you're a student of classical music, and they respond, "Oh, I love classical music. Have you heard that song that goes bee, 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 bum?" They have reduced an entire, vast, complex discipline to its single, most trivial and commercialized data point. Sun sign astrology, the kind you find in magazines and on websites, is the pop music version of a rich and intricate classical tradition. You know, it takes one single element of a person's birth chart, the position of the sunshine, and uses it to make broad, generic statements that could apply to almost anyone. Leos are proud and love attention. Cancers are nurturing and sensitive. These are not entirely wrong, but they are so simplistic as to be almost meaningless. It's like describing a person's entire personality based only on their nationality. A real astrological chart is a work of staggering complexity. It is a snapshot of the heavens at the moment you were born, taken from the location you were born. It includes the sun, the moon, which represents your emotional nature, and is considered just as important as the sun, Mercury communication, Venus love and values, Mars drive and anger, Jupiter expansion and belief, Saturn limitation and discipline, and the outer planets. Each of these planets is in one of the 12 zodiac signs, which colors how that planet's energy is expressed. And each is in one of the 12 houses, which determines the area of life where that energy plays out. On top of that, you have the intricate web of aspects, the angles between the planets, which show how these different parts of your personality interact with each other. To reduce all of that complexity to, I'm a Scorpio, is to miss the entire point. It's the difference between a stick figure and a photorealistic portrait. The frustration comes from the fact that this oversimplification is what most people think astrology is. They read their daily horoscope, find it to be vague and inaccurate, and then dismiss the entire subject as silly nonsense. They have never seen a real chart. They have never experienced the uncanny accuracy and psychological depth that a proper interpretation can provide. They are judging a masterpiece based on a bad caricature. So when someone asks, "What's your sign?" how do you respond without sounding like a pretentious snob? One way is to play along, but then add a layer of complexity. I'm a Libra sun, but I have a Scorpio moon and a Capricorn rising, so it gets a little complicated. This immediately signals that there's more to the story than they think and can be a good conversation starter. Another approach is to use a gentle, educational metaphor. That's a great question. The sun sign is like the cover of a book. It gives you a general idea, but the real story is in all the other planets, which are like the chapters inside. You can also answer with a friendly question that invites them to go deeper. I'm a Libra. Do you know your moon or rising sign? That's where it gets really interesting. This offers them a way into the real subject without making them feel bad for their initial question. The goal is not to shame them for their pop culture knowledge, it's to use their flicker of interest as an opportunity. They have opened the door a tiny crack. Your job is to gently open it a little wider and show them that there is a whole fascinating universe on the other side, far richer and more complex than they ever imagined. Astrology is a symbolic language for discussing the human soul. To learn it is to learn a new way of understanding yourself and others. And that conversation has to start somewhere, even if it's with a question as simple as, "What's your sign?" Number 1. So, you believe in magic. Arthur C. Clarke's third law states, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. The placebo effect demonstrates that a person's belief can create measurable physiological change, a core principle behind many magical systems. The word magic itself traces back to the Magi, a class of Zoroastrian priests in ancient Persia, who were renowned for their astrological and spiritual knowledge. The term originally referred to their wisdom and practices, not to supernatural trickery. And here we are, the number 1, the most common, the most basic, the most fundamentally annoying question of them all. It's the question that underlies almost all the others. You tell someone you are into esotericism and they get a little smirk on their face, a glint in their eye. "Oh, right," they say. "So, you believe in magic?" The way they say the word magic, it's dripping with condescension. It's the word you use for children's stories, for fantasy novels, for pulling a rabbit out of a hat. It's a word that in the modern world means not real. By asking this question, they are putting you on the spot. They are daring you to say yes. They are daring you to admit that you believe in fairy tales. It is the ultimate loaded question. If you say yes, you confirm their suspicion that you are a naive, irrational person who has lost touch with reality. You will be dismissed instantly. If you say no, you seem to be disavowing the very thing you are interested in. You sound like you're ashamed of it or trying to hedge your bets. It feels like a trap. The problem is the word itself. Magic has been so completely debased and misunderstood that it has lost almost all of its original meaning. The modern mind has only two categories for it: the stage illusions of performers and the impossible special effects-driven fantasies of movies. There is no room in the popular imagination for what magic actually is from an esoteric perspective. As Aleister Crowley famously defined it, magic is the science and art of causing change to occur in conformity with will. Read that again. There is nothing in that definition about violating the laws of physics. There is nothing about turning people into frogs. It's about causing change. How? By using your will, your focused intention, your consciousness. This is a profoundly psychological and practical definition. It reframes magic as a technology of the self. The tools of magic ritual, symbolism, meditation, visualization are all methods for focusing the will and directing it toward a desired change. The change might be internal, like overcoming a bad habit or developing a new skill, or external, like finding a new job or improving a relationship. The theory is that by making a precise change in your own consciousness, you can cause a corresponding change in the world around you. This is the principle of as above, so below. Is this real? Does it work? This is where we go back to the placebo effect, to the power of belief, to the mystery of consciousness itself. If you focus your entire being on a single goal, if you align your thoughts, your emotions, and your actions with that goal, you dramatically increase the probability of achieving it. Is that supernatural, or is it just the ultimate expression of natural human potential? The esotericists would say there is no difference. So the most annoying question deserves the most thoughtful answer. When someone asks, "So, you believe in magic?" you can't just say yes or no. You have to redefine the term for them. A great way to start is by asking a question back. What do you mean by magic? This puts the onus on them. They will probably stammer and refer to fantasy stories or stage tricks. This gives you the perfect opening. Ah, I see. Yeah, I don't believe in the Harry Potter kind of magic. The traditional definition is something different. It's about using things like focused intention and psychology to create change in your life. By doing this, you've completely sidestepped their trap. You've rejected their childish definition and replaced it with a mature, intelligent one. You've transformed the conversation from one about fantasy to one about human potential. You can also use the Crowley definition directly, but perhaps in simpler terms. I'm interested in the art of causing change through focused will. Some people call that magic. This is a confident, clear statement that brooks no argument. The key is to reclaim the word. Don't let them use it as a weapon to dismiss you. Grab it, dust it off, and show them its true meaning. Magic is not about escaping reality. It's about engaging with it more deeply and more powerfully than ever before. It's not about believing in the impossible. It's about discovering what is possible when you learn to use the full force of your own consciousness. And yes, in that sense, you do believe in it. You don't just believe in it, you practice it. And you don't need anyone else's permission or approval to do so. Your results, the changes in your own life, will be all the proof you ever need.